Good morning, everyone. How are you? This is Wednesday. So happy Wednesday to each of you. My name is Kimberly O'Neill, and I have the honor of serving as your facilitator for this particular part of the nonprofit governance series. Today, we are going to start off with the first of 3 workshops. We are doing this every week for the next 3 weeks, starting at 11:30 a.m. to give you all another glimpse of what it takes to build effective and efficient boards of directors. I am doing this in partnership with Board Build, who will be joining me next week. But today we're going to get started with how to develop a responsible and responsive board of directors. A few housekeeping issues. If something happens with my technology and I am gone for a few minutes, just know that I will be back. I have a backup. I always like to share that. I have a backup hotspot with me, but I always like to let people know if something happens and we get disconnected, I will be back. So that's number 1. Number 2, have something to take some notes with. We will be uploading this recording to the Urban Search Institute's page on Facebook later today or by tomorrow. So just know that you'll be able to access a replay. But for today, this is really about you taking notes and staying present in the conversation. Although there's a PowerPoint presentation, it has minimal content because I want to ensure that we are engaging with one another. This is a webinar style format as compared to a traditional Zoom webinar where you can kind of come off of mute, turn your video on and engage with me. So because this is a traditional webinar format, utilize the Q&A feature to type any questions that you have as I'm going through various sections. You do not need to wait until the end for me to engage and answer your questions, especially if we're moving on to another topic and you want to make sure that you have clarity on that particular issue before we move forward. Just make sure you're utilizing the Q&A feature. But for now, let's utilize the chat feature. If you can just tell me in the chat who you are, where you are logging in from in the world. Are you in the North Texas area? Are you logging in from somewhere else? Are you a nonprofit board member, a nonprofit founder, or ED? If you can just tell me who you are and why you're here, and honestly, what you're hoping to get out of this in the chat feature. I'd like to know, I'm a professor, so I always like to know who's in my virtual classroom while we're here today. So if you can do that for me, that would be really, really awesome. So who you are, what you're hoping to get out of this, hoping to get out of this today, and any other information you'd like for me to know. And then remember to use the Q&A function to send any questions that you have of me so that I can see them and I can answer them throughout the session today. So let's go on and get started. We have about 2 hours. I want to leave a good portion of that to Q&A. And if we have time, once we finish the structured format, if we have time, I want to be able to possibly pull some of you off. I can stop the recording so that part doesn't go live, but we can make sure that you are present, accounting, and we can maybe bring you on towards the end and have some one-on-one session as well. So with that being said, hello, Nadine. Hello, Kimberly. Hello, Amy. It's so great to have you all in here with me today. So let's go on and get started. So the board governance series is it's hosted by and sponsored by, hey, April, it's sponsored by UNT Dallas School. It's the University of North Texas at Dallas. More specifically, it's in partnership with the School of Human Resources, the Office of Experiential Learning, and the Urban Search Institute. And for this 3-part series, we are doing this in partnership with Board Build, my company Giving Blueprint, and my nonprofit training initiative Cause Studio. So I wanted you to be aware of who's coming to the table with everyone today. And hello, Donna, it is great to have you here as well. Over the next 3 weeks, beginning of today, we will have 3 very structured conversations. Today, we're going to talk about how to develop a responsible and responsive board of directors. Next week at 11:30, we're going to move into how to match with well-trained and committed board members members. And then finally, on our third week, we're going to focus on how to develop high impact board structures and evaluate board effectiveness. As I mentioned when we first logged on, a lot of times we talk about what does it take to build a board? How do we find the right board members? What kind of board members should we be looking for, right? And so the first 2 weeks, that's pretty typical information that people want to know, and that board leadership and administrative leadership, those are typically the two things that they pay attention to. But the one thing that we rarely hear people talk about is how do we make sure that our boards we are evaluating our boards and we're paying attention to their effectiveness, and that we're really putting together a high impact board structure. So we want to make sure, of course, we only have a total of 6 hours over the course of these 3 weeks. And to be quite honest, 6 hours is really what I can do in one day, but we're going to try and maximize the opportunities that we have with you by giving you direct information and then allowing you to engage back with us. Next week is going to be really, really special with Board Build. If you are in the North Texas area and you are not familiar with Board Build, you should be. Their website is boardbuild.org. They are based in Fort Worth. They are, to me, the latest and greatest thing that has come into our nonprofit sector. They focus on training existing board members and those that are interested in becoming board members, but they also match. So they train and they match. So they have opportunities. If you are in the North Texas area, they have opportunities by way of some of their grant funding, where if you have board vacancies, you need to replace people, need to add some additional people to the board, that they have opportunities where you can provide them with the board description, upload it into their system, and they help to vet and partner you with those that have already completed their board training through their program. So not just any and everybody that's interested in becoming a board member, but those that have actually gone through their virtual training with them. So if you are in the North Texas area, I highly, highly recommend that you engage with us next week. And if you are in that position right now, there are some opportunities based on some grant funding to get your existing board members trained for free. And if you are on this call today and you are not in alignment with a nonprofit, but you are interested in serving on a board, you too can reach out to me. My information will be at the end. You can reach out to me. I will put you in contact with Board Build today so you can take advantage of some of the limited opportunities that they have for free board training, whether it's for your existing board members or because you are interested. In learning more about the training for yourself. So let's talk about the 3 objectives for today. When I think about objectives, it comes down to 3 things for today. When I put these together, I said, by the end of the session today, what is it that people will be able to do, right? So by the end of the session today, you should be able to explain the fiduciary and legal responsibilities of nonprofit board governance. We won't be able to cover everything, but a lot of things you will be able to have a better understanding of. The second one, by the end of our time today, you will understand the role of the board in determining the policies, procedures, long-term strategy for nonprofits. And finally, you'll be able to create a matrix to help assess your board skills and the capital needs of your boards. A lot of times that last one is a big one, because a lot of times we put boards together and we don't assess each individual person for what they bring to the table. We're so excited that people just want to join our board. We are so excited that people want to give back to our boards. But then once we get on the board, they get on the boards, we realize that it really just isn't a good fit for us. It's not a good fit for your organization. You don't know how to separate from that person, and that person doesn't know how to separate from you. And so you want to make sure that you're creating a matrix that you actually understand what your organization needs, that you can identify the gaps in governance opportunities, and then fill those gaps in with people that have those skill sets and those connections and can bring that social capital into the organization. This is so different than running your own organization. So let's go on and get started with who I am. Some of you know who I am and some of you do not. My name is Kimberly O'Neill. For those of you that weren't on when we first started, I am the CEO of Giving Blueprint. We are a community and economic development consultancy based in North Texas. We work around the country to help impact and improve conditions in historically discriminated communities, especially those communities where we see a majority of people that identify as Black Americans. I'm also the founder of Cause Studio. We launched that in January of 2015. We are an award-winning nonprofit startup training and professional development initiative. When I utilize the terms nonprofit startup, for us, we define that as organizations that haven't been around more than 5 years, and or regardless of how long they've been around, they really haven't consistently been able to bring in $150,000 in the operating budget. What that means to us is that there is a significant risk in that organization being able to sustain itself. And so we created a professional development initiative. It used to be an in-person incubator. Now we've moved on to virtual training to be able to stretch our arms wide across the country. I am a licensed nonprofit consultant. I received my credentials through the Standards for Excellence Institute, which is based in Baltimore, Maryland. The Standards for Excellence Institute has created a set of standards for the nonprofit industry. If you have never heard of the Standards for Excellence Institute, I highly recommend, and I'm looking for my book, I just had it out. I highly recommend that you look them up, the Standards for Excellence Institute, because these standards that are set help to remove the common sense factor that many nonprofit leaders, especially newer nonprofit leaders, use when they are creating organizations. I wanted to do this. It doesn't work for me this way because I don't have what I need, but the standards and the IRS or state regulation say you must operate in a certain way. A lot of times we move into operating nonprofits as if they're our own businesses. The Standards for Excellence Institute helps to establish a uniform set of standards that we can see nonprofits using around the country, but it also helps many nonprofits just to comply and to get into compliance. I'm always asked, Kimberly, where do we learn the things that you teach? Well, sometimes it's reading books, sometimes it's trial and error, sometimes it's because you hit a brick wall and you have to figure out how to recover. But the Standards for Excellence Institute and the training that's provided, it really does help to provide those nuances that you really need to know, but you have no idea where to go and get them. I'm also a certified public manager. Most of my career I've spent in municipal management around the country, and I'm certified through the George Washington University based out of Washington, D.C. Many people know me as a racial and social justice practitioner. I believe that the people with the largest pockets don't get to make all decisions for community. I believe in igniting power within the community, which means I center community in everything that I do. The people dictate the work that I do. I don't dictate the work that I do. I've spent 30 plus years in community development, municipal leadership, and nonprofit management. I've served more than 20 years as a professor, both in the business area, nonprofit management, and political science. And at one point, and I do believe that that has changed. So at one point I served as the youngest Black woman city manager in the United States, operating and running and serving as the municipal CEO of a city right outside of Washington, D.C. My achievements are based on, I've been working for more than 30 years in community. And so listed, I don't need to read all of them, but here are some of the awards that I've gotten over the past few years. And this work, I always say awards are not for me, awards are for the people that I serve, because not one of these awards comes without me working with someone and helping them to realize their dreams. Sometimes they are the ones doing the work, I'm just providing the guidance. So anytime I get an award, I always say, how do we use this? Not just for me, but how do we use this for everybody that we serve? And then my mantra, and this is where we get started. Service to others is a part of life, and our involvement is not an option. What that means to me is how we show up to serve others should be with honor and intention. And I wanted to start our conversation off today as it relates to board leadership, board governance, and those responsibilities within, because how we show up to serve others should be with honor and intention. Just because I might want to do it, I need to ask myself, am I in the right space? Can I honor the requirements? Can I commit to the requirements and the expectations? And if not, it does mean that I probably cannot show up with the honor and intention that's needed to serve as a good board member within nonprofit organizations. And so I truly live a life that service to others is a part of life, and our involvement is not an option. But when I do decide to show up for certain things, I have to make sure that I can do it with the honor and intention that it deserves. Otherwise, in that season, remember this throughout this entire series, when you are identifying and looking for board members, if board members cannot show up with the honor and intention to serve the mission of the organization and fulfill their legal and fiduciary obligations to the organizations, they cannot serve with honor and intention. And as you are walking through these next 3 weeks, if you're going to be with us, remember, you need to make sure that everybody that you select and how you select them, it has to be honorable and with well-meaning intention, okay? So let's talk about board members' responsibilities. If you have any questions, remember, post your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar chat. You can chat all you want. I'll periodically review the chat to see if there are any questions in there that I need to answer, but utilize, if there's a more structured question, make sure you're placing it in the Q&A function. So let's talk about board member responsibilities. When you think about a board, what should a board be comprised of? When I think about what a board should be comprised of, and you might want to take some notes here because I have a few things to offer for you. When you think about what a board member's responsibilities are, the board should be comprised of people who are personally committed to the mission of the organization, and they understand their fiduciary role in performing the legal duties of the governing body. For clarification purposes, when we use the term fiduciary, we are talking about a board member's role and responsibilities as being the shepherd and the conduit between the internal and external stakeholders. They are responsible for the governance of the organization, which means they assume a different level of responsibility than even the founders do. Many founders that I engage with, we're talking about nonprofit startups, many of the founders that I engage with operate on the administrative side. And I like to remind them that although they're operating in partnership with the board has the ultimate responsibility. In most structures, there are some other board governance structures. Most of you that are on this call today, you wouldn't even be qualified to really incorporate that at this time because it would require too many changes within your organization. So for the most part, in the way that we look at how organizations are operating, you are looking for board members that are going to be committed to the mission, not you, not the other people, to the mission of the organization. Mission forward, mission first, okay? And that they understand their fiduciary responsibilities and the legal duties of governing the body of the nonprofit. Second, the board should establish and periodically review the bylaws. Many of us talk about bylaws on an ongoing basis. And one thing that I often hear is that bylaws are being modified by executive directors. You can't do that. Bylaws have to be modified, and the modifications have to be voted on and agreed on by the board of directors. And in addition to those bylaws, any accompanying policies that need to go with them, the board is responsible for making sure that they are effective governance bylaws and policies and ensure the safe and efficient management of the organization. So bylaws, in terms of any modifications and creation, that is the responsibility of the board of directors. The board is also responsible for its own operations, including its own periodic evaluation. A lot of times we don't see boards that are evaluating their own effectiveness and their own efficiency. Week 3 of this training, we are actually going to walk through some actual practices on the things that you can do and use some templates on how do you get your boards to evaluate, do some self-evaluation. In addition to the self-evaluation, how do you focus on the overall evaluation of the board of the group? The board should also have stated performance expectations and hold board members accountable for attendance at the meetings, for participation in fundraising activities, committee service, and involvement in program activities. Board members have got to be visible, they've got to be engaged, and although they don't run the administrative side, their presence within the organization should be known. One of the things that I often hear, well, especially as we're talking about participation in fundraising activities, there are grant applications and other funding opportunities that ask one question: what percentage of your board provides any level of donation to your organization? I'm paraphrasing because everybody phrases it a little differently. I don't see them asking how much, but there are questions: what percentage of your board, basically what percentage of your board donates to the organization? Your answer should only be 100%. Anything less than that says that you might not have an active and engaged board across the board. We're often hear people talk about give and or get responsibilities. The organization board members are responsible for giving a certain dollar amount. The organization's board members are responsible for giving it and or going to get it. We really should see organizations focusing on the give side, and then they can still get an impact, but it shouldn't be give or get, it should be give and get. Board members should be responsible and engaged in fundraising activities to include their own personal donations to the organizations. The board, not the executive director, not the administrative team, is responsible for orientation, for onboarding, for the education, and where appropriate, the removal of board members. New board members should receive an introduction to any types of your bylaws, any other standards and policies that you may use. One of the things that I recommend to my clients, there's a book called The Perfect Board, and you can find any book that resonates with you and your organization. But for boards, I always recommend that there's some uniform book that all board members get so that it sets the tone for the expectations. So for my clients, I recommend The Perfect Board, but there's so many amazing books in the market space that you can find different books that may be useful. Another one that I think is really great in just understanding overall board governance and how boards and the executive director or CEO work together is The Challenge of Change. It's an older book by Philip Koltoff, Coltoff. He has a second edition. The second edition has a new name, but The Challenge of Change is a really great book. I read it in one day. The board should meet as frequently as needed to fulfill and adequately conduct the business of the organization. At a minimum, board should be meeting quarterly. If you are not as sustainable, you don't have really great bylaws in place, your policies may be a little iffy, you may want to look at meeting a little bit more frequently than that. But your board at a minimum should be meeting at least 4 times a year. For most of the organizations that I work with, their boards typically meet monthly for shorter periods of time. And monthly for shorter period of time, or every other month for maybe at 30 minutes additional what they would have done if they were meeting on a monthly basis. But at no time should you be meeting less than 4 times a year. When we meet again on the 3rd week, I'm actually going to go through a series of exercises, provide you with some templates on what it looks like for you to conduct a board meeting. What should your minutes look like? I want you all to not just get information from me. I want you to walk away and know how to use the information. And so those things will be provided at no cost to those of you that are showing up live, because I can give them to you because we're engaging in this particular format. Board agendas should be strategically structured around decision-making in a way that facilitates efficient, effective, and engaging meetings. Accurate minutes reflecting board and committee actions should be kept and distributed to all board and committee members. Based on your bylaws, for most people from a standard practice perspective, boards are not going to be able to meet, even if it's a scheduled meeting, if you don't have a quorum present. Quorums are defined in your bylaws. And so I have worked with organizations. I want to give you this as an example. I have worked with organizations where they didn't have a quorum, where they decided to vote on things and move forward with business of the day from a governance perspective. And I had to remind them that from an audit perspective, you can't do that. Your bylaws, that's your law, the laws of the organization, right? This is the code that you all live by. And you can't operate outside of that. I have been on boards where we didn't have a quorum, and I had to remind people, I guess we're not having a board meeting today, and we've left because we could not hold and operate and do the business of the day because we didn't have the number of members that we needed present and available to make decisions and conduct board business, okay? And then finally, committees. Committees that are created off of the board, they should be created, especially those that have decision-making authority. They should report any committee action. So if you have board committees that are meeting and it's not it's a portion of the board, maybe one or two people, any activity that's happening by way of board committee, that information, the same way you would do in a full body meeting, that information needs to be captured in minutes, and that information needs to be provided, and so that it can be disseminated to all board members. You have your working committee, but your working committee works to make some decisions on behalf of the full board or make recommendations to the full board, but the full board should get updates on those minutes so that everybody is up to date with what is happening. Anytime you make decisions, any type of voting decisions for the board, it is important that you capture who said yes, who said no, who abstained, and who wasn't there. Because you want to always have a record for two reasons. Number one, the organization needs a record. The other one is if you are audited, auditors do ask for copies of your minutes, random samples, right? So they won't just say, hey, just give me the whole year. Sometimes they may say, give me December and give me August. And you want to make sure that all of your minutes are on board and in order, because the last thing you need is you want to see that decisions are made for the organization. If you've not captured who was there, how many votes were you in? Did you have a quorum to be able to make those changes within your bylaws? Anytime there is, for me and for best practices, anytime we make a formal decision on a board, we actually have, we take the vote, and then the next meeting, we have people sign off on it, right? Because during the meeting, there may be some changes to language. So preparing ahead of time, you may have some draft of some changes that you might want to make. But anytime, especially we're talking about bylaws, anytime there were any significant changes, we actually had people sign off on it. That way we have signatures that said that A, B, or C could happen. For those of you that have virtual meetings where you can have electronic voting, electronic convenings based on your board bylaws, then you capture people's responses. Old school Outlook, MS Outlook used to allow us to send something out and people could say yes, no, or just abstain from that. And so what we would do with the organization that I used to run, 15 years ago, is we would send that out, the board chair would send that out, and when people would vote, they would click yes or no, and then once we got that vote back, we print all of that out. And so the original email that went out, the supporting documentation that went out, and the vote of every board member was captured for the minutes, and that way we would print that out. We would keep a copy in the administrative office, and we will also, the board chair would also keep a copy. So it's just something for you to kind of think about. How do you do things better? How do you not just do the bare minimum? When you are thinking about board responsibilities, how does your board not just do the bare minimum? How does your board excel in its responsibilities so that there's no question that you're operating with honor and integrity and with intention? Okay. Any questions on that section before I move on? Welcome to the people that have joined us since we first started. Are there any questions so far? I don't see anything in Q&A. If anybody have a question or thought about anything that I've talked about so far, just on board member responsibilities, I'm happy to engage with that quickly before I move on to our next section. And hearing and seeing none, I'm going to move on to the next section, which is board governance and fiduciary responsibilities. And I want to read this to you because I want you to hear this. The primary role of a nonprofit board is the governance of the organization. This includes establishing the structure, policies, and plans that guide the board and staff members in fulfilling the organization's missions. In order for a nonprofit's board to be in a position to effectively govern an organization, it must first take responsibility for its own operations. Careful attention to recruiting and selecting board members, as well as training and orienting new members, is crucial to the success of an organization's board and its operations. Board members should determine the policies and procedures necessary for maintaining an effective board. These policies should cover recruiting and orienting new board members, fundraising, strategic planning, and board meeting and participation. So I have a list for you and we'll send it since you're registered. I'll just make sure it's sent out to you. I actually have a list of policies that the boards are responsible for. And so it would be great if you will actually look at this, we'll send it to you after today. It's a list of policies that the board is responsible for. You can look and see, do we have these policies? Is this policy applicable to our organization? And then what's important for a board to do is, if you implemented a policy in 2020, when do you review it next? So a lot of times with boards, we see that policies and procedures are put in place for board operations, and then we see that boards never return to revisit them. There should be a standard practice within your organizations that as these policies and procedures and your bylaws are put into place, there should be a cycle every 2 years, every year, every 3 years. If it's financial, maybe you review it every year or every 2 years. So you want to look at this list and then put a date in terms of, we review this once a quarter, or we review this once a year in January. We review this every 2 years, and we review this in August. You want to have, your board needs to have a structured process in the way that it reviews its policies, existing policies, and the recommendations for new policies. It also needs to pay attention to what are industry practices right now, what kinds of changes are happening within the sector, especially as it relates to financial management. Financial management related changes for the nonprofit sector, you can see those every single year. And so it is the board's responsibility, in partnership with the administration, but it's the board's responsibility to be updated on what kind of standards from a financial perspective are being changed. I do see a question, how should we ask questions for future reference? If you can put them in Q&A, Nicole, if you can put them in the Q&A feature, if you can't find it, just put it in the chat. Once we get towards the end of this session, I am going to officially close it so that we can have Q&A. This is being recorded, so I don't want to record anyone's personal board-related concerns in something that's just going to live on the web. And so when we get to that point, I want to have a hard stop so that we can have questions. And at that point, if it's easier for you all to ask me questions, I can bring you up and we can bring you off of mute to be able to ask those questions. It's easier for you to ask it verbally versus typing it. Does that help, Nicole? All right, so then the board also has, and when it talks about the fiduciary responsibility, so your fiduciary responsibility is really looking at the duty of care. It's about the responsibility of a board to operate solely in the organization's interests. So I'm going to say that again. It is the responsibility of the board to operate solely in the organization's interest, not the interest of the founder, not the interest of the board chair, not the interest of an employee that they really like. It is the responsibility of the board to mission first, mission forward. right? That is the responsibility of the board. The board members hold the organization in a position of trust. And that's because stakeholders, internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, are holding the board members on to another level of responsibility. I will add this right now, because I want you all to understand the importance of what I'm getting ready to talk about with the duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. Growing up, my parents had a set of friends, and the husband sat on a board. The board, the organization let its insurance lapse as it related to general liability and D&O, directors and omissions insurance. And if you know anything about insurance for nonprofits, D&O is not negotiable. Insurance is not negotiable, but D&O insurance is not negotiable, because if there is a financial liability to the organization and the organization does not have insurance or the cash to pay that financial liability, the board members are personally responsible for that. And I remember that as a child, I didn't really understand anything about nonprofits at that time, but I just remember the conversations around my parents' friends having to pay for this debt to this, for this nonprofit because of all of these things. It was like the big secret that they were talking about, but it was really catastrophic. But as I got older and started working in and around nonprofits, that would stick out over and over again. And so when I train, I always tell people, insurance is not negotiable. If you're operating on day one, where is your insurance? It is not negotiable. But if you want the right board members, if you want seasoned board members, if you want board members who have participated on other boards, have great reputations, have the social capital and the financial capital to invest in the organization, I'm going to tell you right now, you better make sure you have the D&O insurance, because those of us that really understand the nonprofit sector and what board governance really means, we won't touch your organizations without it. And so walking away from this conversation today, I want to encourage you to really look at your insurance policies. If you don't have one, you may want to invest in one. I can't tell you what to do, but I can provide you some advice and guidance, and then you go back to your board and your legal representation. But I would recommend you can look at insurancefornonprofits.org. It is a nonprofit organization that helps organizations around the country connect with brokers, can help them find the best nonprofit insurance rates. What were the names of both insurance types you mentioned? So D and O, D, the letter D, A and D, O. D and O stands for directors and omissions insurance. So it's D, so you want your general liability, right? That protects the organization. And I just want to add this too. This is important from a governance perspective. When you talk to these insurance companies, be honest in what you do, who you serve, and how you serve, because your insurance and the coverage is going to be based on that. You don't want to leave out something that you do when you're engaging with the public and you don't have the right amount of coverage for that. And so you want to make sure when you're talking to these insurance brokers, you're thinking with a governance hat and have that in mind. You want to be honest. Do you serve children? Do you have to get background checks? Where are people alone with children at any time? It could be walking down a hallway. It could be on a trip. Tell them everything that you do so that you can get the right general liability insurance and the D&O, then ask for the D&O rider on top of that, and anything else that's applicable to your organization. Go to 1, 2, or 3 so you can get some quotes and you can compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges to get the right and the best and most responsible quote for your organization, but it is not unnegotiable. So April, it is D, directors and omissions insurance. It's a rider on top of your general liability. Right? Okay, so let's go back to the duty of care. So there are 3 things. Under well-established principles of nonprofit corporation law, a board member must meet certain standards of conduct and attention in carrying out his or her responsibilities to the organization. Several states have statutes adopting some variation of these duties that I'm about to share, which would be used in court to determine whether or not a board member has acted improperly. These standards are usually described as the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. Duty of care. Duty of care describes the level of competence that is expected of a board member and is commonly expressed as the duty of care that an ordinarily prudent person would exercise in a like position and under similar circumstances. What this means is that a board member owes the duty to exercise reasonable care when he or she makes a decision as a steward of the organization. So that is duty of care is the first one. The second one is duty of loyalty. The duty of loyalty is a standard of faithfulness. A board member must give undivided allegiance when making decisions affecting the organization. This means that a board member can never use information obtained as a member for personal gain, but must act in the best interest of the organization. Again, mission forward, mission first. And the last one is duty of obedience. The duty of obedience requires board members to be faithful to the organization's mission. They are not permitted to act in a way that is inconsistent with the central goals of the organization. A basis for this rule lies in the public's trust, and the organization will manage donated funds to fulfill the organization's mission. I can send this link out to you in the recap for today, but this is from Bridgespan, which is a consulting company based out of Boston. And this was written by Bruce Hopkins, and he has, and for Board Source in 2003, he wrote an overview called Legal Responsibilities of Nonprofit Boards. So we'll go on and make sure you get the link to that and any additional resource links as well for you. Any questions before we move on? Any questions on duty of care, duty of loyalty, or duty of obedience? Let's stop right here and just ask this questions. How many of you, based on, and you can answer in the chat because the chat will not be a part of the recording that's shared with the public. How many of you, based on what we've talked about, because we've only covered board member responsibilities, core responsibilities, governance and fiduciary responsibilities. How many of you thus far believe that your board members are acting in alignment with that? Anyone? Nadine, your board members are, I just want to make sure I'm repeating, your board members are doing that. And that is excellent. Kimberly is also saying yes to her board members as well. Awesome. Anybody having any challenges with that? Anybody have any challenges with the board members? So we have, Donna has also answered in Q&A. She has said that. And April, this is a great question. So April's question is, how are those duties tangibly carried out within a board? And then is this led by the board chair? The board chair does have a responsibility. It is a collective effort for the entire board. The board chair is the leader, meaning the board chair brings everyone together, but it is the full board's responsibility. From a tangible perspective, it goes back to the bylaws. It goes back to training your board members. It goes back to how did you select your board members? How did you orient your board members for coming on board? What types of documentations, conflict of interest did you have them sign off on? Have you asked them to donate, and are they donating? How many meetings can they miss a year, and have they missed no more than that? And if they are missing meetings pretty regularly, is there a conversation that's happening? Are there some standards that the board has put in place when someone has missed some meetings? How are you following up with them? Has something catastrophic been happening? Because then that's a different type of situation, or people just not coming to meetings. How are they fulfilling their give requirements? Are you sending out invoices every month if they're supposed to pay every month? How are you reminding them that they are behind on paying their board contributions towards the budget? So everything that board members are responsible for, it should be written, it should be documented, they should have access to it somewhere. It should be in the bylaws, it should be in the policies. I also mentioned, in terms of what are the policies that the board should review and how often should it be reviewed? Who is guiding that? Who is leading it? Do you have separate committees that are responsible for that? One of the things that I also, a lot of times at board meetings, I think boards do a lot of talking about yesterday. And many boards in their meetings don't talk about tomorrow. Many boards are micromanaging the executive director and CEO as if they are leading the administrative side, instead of boards having a more global view on where the organization should go and the mission, and are we in alignment with the strategic plan? So all of the things, if you had a checklist of things that you're saying the boards are responsible for, from a tangible perspective, how is that happening within your organization? A lot of times we have bullet lists of what board members are supposed to do, but what does that translate into? So if you have the first bullet that I provided, where I said the board should be composed of individuals who are personally committed to the mission of the organization. I understand their roles as a fiduciary in performing the legal duties of a governing body. How is that happening in your organization? How are you not just saying yes because they signed up to be on the board, but what kinds of documents are they signing? How are you confirming that they understand their role? How are you providing training to understand that they understand their role? How are you confirming that they understand the mission of the organization? How are you confirming that they understand the legal responsibilities? So how is that done? And then how is that monitored? And for everything, and it sounds like it's a lot of work, it's a lot more work when people are operating out of compliance and you're trying to figure out how to get your organization back together. So when we talk about boards, a lot of times it feels like, for a lot of organizations, I feel the administrative team, so the CEO or executive director and their team facilitating what should happen on the board, and that shouldn't be. Because the governance side is oversight. It's like saying the president of the United States and Congress. Congress is there for a particular reason, and the president is responsible for executing, just like a city council is responsible for legislative things, and then a mayor or a city manager is responsible for executing the day-to-day. What are the checks and balances within your organization? We have checks and balances in government, but what are the checks and balances within your organization? Not just that you have a nice set of bylaws, but you have this set of bylaws and you understand the policy behind that and the process for monitoring that as well. So there are some longer term things that you need to do within an organization. It can't just be, we have the bylaws, we have a checklist, but how are you documenting this, and what's your frequency for ensuring that that information is checked? And when we are not in compliance, or we're deviating away from whatever the standard is, what's the process for getting it back on track? There's one other question. I think I got that one. So board chairs have a responsibility from leadership. They're the point of contact, but a board chair can't just arbitrarily make decisions for an entire board. That's why you have those bylaws. That's why you need a quorum, because if you didn't need a quorum, right, then a board chair or vice chair or treasurer or anybody could make up decisions for the board, unless your bylaws say that certain things. Maybe you have an executive committee, and the executive committee has a privilege of making certain decisions outside of the regular board. That has to be determined and documented by the entire board, and it has to be voted on before that can happen. So it's a combination of both. And then I want to just touch on the legal responsibilities of the board. So from a legal perspective, here are some things that a board needs to do to fulfill not just its fiduciary responsibilities, but what that translates into on the legal side. One, I already said, putting the interests of the organization first, mission forward. They cannot use their position as a director to benefit their personal or business interests. That means benefiting family members and business associates. Anytime something is happening within an organization, and if there is a potential conflict of interest, that needs to be shared ahead of time so that the board, whatever the policies are, they can move forward. But if there are any exemptions that can be provided, that those things are known ahead of time. We have a number of people in organizations that their personal businesses are benefiting. They do bring people in, and it's not fair, which means that you're not really governing the organization. You are profiting from the organization, you or someone else in some sort of way, and that could cause huge legal implications for the organization. Board members need to stay informed about the affairs of the nonprofit. The nonprofit is a business that just happens to be a charity. Always remember that. Nonprofits are businesses that just happen to be a charity. 501c3 status does not come before the organization forming on the state level or in one of our territories. But first, the business side is developed, and then the 501c3 status is requested from the IRS. So you want to make sure that you keep that in mind. So anything that's happening, any state requirements, any federal requirements, it is the responsibility of the board members collectively and individually to keep abreast and informed of the affairs of the organization, especially any legal liabilities that may come on board. Attending board meetings is a critical important part of it, supporting decisions of the board. So maybe there's something I didn't agree with, but I may support the decision of the board if the vote was fair, and I don't think that there are any ethical implications as it relates to the decisions that were made. We want to make sure that our board members are preserving the confidentiality of the nonprofit's business information and operations, and we do not want to divert business opportunities to another business or entity when those opportunities would benefit the nonprofit. Okay, let's do this one more time. We want to ensure that board members are not diverting any business opportunities to another business or another entity when those opportunities would benefit the organization. I always get questions, and then I always question. When I hear people say that they put the founder of another organization on their board, I always ask why. Unless it's a coalition-based type of situation where you're taking executive directors and board members from a collective group because there's this coalition that's been created. So there's this collaborative mindset that needs to come together. But when I hear people say, well, because they've done it, so you want someone else that's in your same field to be on your board when they are actually competing for the exact same thing, like, why would we necessarily do that? And so I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's good. I just wonder why people do it. Coke wouldn't do it, and neither would Pepsi, right? You won't see big businesses putting people on their boards that may have a competing interest, and the competing interest and why that person is serving is not being done from a collaborative perspective. Right? And so we need to be very careful of the people that we're selecting for our boards and how they get on the boards. When I think about any questions at all before we in need of a new board as they are not personally committed, you know, I would say without a doubt, when we recognize that our boards are not committed, we need to have our boards take active measures on that. I remember when we first started Cause Studio in 2015, there was an organization, and this topic about board commitment came up over and over again, and it was around the financial commitment, the give requirement. And I said, well, if they're not giving and your board chair is not enforcing that, your board is just operating any way it wants to. You're not operating in compliance with your own bylaws. And I then started asking questions about maybe the financial commitment was too large for the board members that they selected. And then they told me that the commitment was $30 a month. So you're having a challenge getting board members to pay $30 a month. How can you go out and request anybody to give you grant funding, anybody to give you individual donations when you don't have board members that have been selected and approved by the board that won't even commit to $30 a month? That sets the tone for what people will and won't do for you, but it also sets the tone to what your governance body really looks like. And we could be talking about board donations or board giving contributions. We could be talking about coming and showing up to meetings. Heck, we could be talking about whether or not you come and you stay at meetings. Or when you come to meetings, do you zone out? So you're there physically, whether it's virtually or in person, but you are on to doing something else. You're not even paying attention to the business of the day. You're not keeping up with the votes. You just say yes because yes sounds good. And it sounds like there are a bunch of people around the table that said yes. So when they get to me, I too am just going to say yes because of that. And so you want to make sure that you have the right people that are committed to the organization, mission first, mission forward. Mission first, mission forward, not committed to founders, not committed to CEOs and executive directors, not committed to their friends on the board, not committed again because they like a particular employee or series of employees, committed to the stakeholders because we are all there in these nonprofits because of the mission, the people, the places, and the things that we have collectively committed to. That's what's priority over everything else within the organization. A question, how about having board advisors who have founded other nonprofits, individuals that have no authority to make decisions but provide insight? Is that an option? I think anything is an option. I think you just have to answer those questions. So when you have board advisors, how much information are you sharing with them? Is it confidential information that you're sharing with them? And if you're sharing it with them, do you have a right to share it with them if you're serving on the board? And so I'm not going to say that board advisors aren't good. I think everybody needs advisement in some way, especially when you're trying to get to another level. But when you're doing that, what kind of structure are you putting around that so that you're still protecting and honoring with a level of integrity, the sensitive information that's happening within your organization? I think that that is really critical to be able to pay attention, to. Sometimes we just think, one of my friends, Jasmine Crow, she is a tech founder of a company called Gooder. But I remember years ago, I heard her say, we are always going to be competing for funding, but we should never be competing for social change, right? And I agree with that 100%. But when we start bringing people into our house, our organizations, with our foundations, how much information are we sharing and why are we sharing that information? I think it's my government background that just makes me always question things. Even when I think something is a great idea, I always want to think about the possibilities of how things look. I want to think about the possibilities, and I actually have something I can share about this too, to kind of give you a different perspective. But I always ask why. And I don't ask why because I want to be a Debbie or Donald Downer, right? I'm asking why because when we're making these decisions on behalf of organizations, we have to be confident in the decisions that we're making, that we've made decisions for the organizations, and those decisions are in the best interest of the organization. Mission first, mission forward. But I remember 2005-ish, I think, about 15, 16 years ago, we were working in collaboration with an organization. And that organization, from a board perspective, we did have collective input. I didn't necessarily agree with it. So I was leading one organization and a man was leading another organization in another state. But we were doing a lot of collaboration. And I had done a lot of footwork with Congress and trying to get a 7-figure grant into our organization from the Department of Justice. And so we had paid a lot of money to work with a lobbyist. We had brought our founder. I mean, I just remember walking up and down the halls of Congress, meeting with our congressional members, just trying to identify who would support this, and not just support, because the funding, one pot of funding was for us, but we were actually pushing for funding for people around the country, other organizations. And I remember the collaborative partner saying, you have a lot of work on your plate. Would you mind if we took a stab, meaning his organization, with the draft? And I said no, because we were going to be working with them. And so they took a stab at the draft and actually submitted under their own organization, and the 7 figures went to them. And in the very beginning, I said I wasn't sure about the collaboration, but our boards collectively agreed that this collaboration was a good one to move forward. And when I shared with our founder that this, the other organization submitted the grant, got the grant, and then because they got the grant based on our footwork, right? Because our names were very similar. And so I will always say, be careful of who you bring in, even in advisement and even from a collaboration perspective, because in that moment when we were talking about collaboration, I honestly felt like mission first, mission forward was sacrificed a little because we were so similar in the work that we did, that we missed the mark, and they got the funding. And it's still a sore spot for me, because right before that, we had lost $1 million because of what we're seeing right now in Ukraine. Something similar had happened with another country. And because of that, the federal government had to pull funding back from many of us that they had already guaranteed grant opportunities. So this was kind of getting us back on track again, and we lost that opportunity. So I will say, when you're thinking about governance and things of that nature, just ask why it's needed, and then think about any potential conflicts that may occur, because anything could happen, even when it's well-meaning and they're good intentions. But in that case, the honor was missing. So I'm going to add that to my statement around that. So if you're going to have a personal board of advisors for your organization, just think about why, who, and are there any potential conflicts before you move forward with that. Any questions before we move on from legal responsibilities? And I know this is a lot of information that I'm sharing, and I'm trying to get through as much as I can so I can leave. We're about an hour in. I want to get through as much as I can within the next 30 minutes. So if you all have questions and you want to start putting them in Q&A, and then if you want to come off mute, just also add that to the Q&A so that we can talk about that as well. When it comes to your bylaws and your policies, I'm going to actually pull that out now because I want to give you an idea. So here are the policies that are recommended for board approval. And I'm just going to read a few of them because this is a full page. Policies that are recommended for board approval. Mission and vision statements, that's non-negotiable. Strategic plan, strategic partnerships policy, board review of the executive director salary, the executive director job description, the executive director annual review, the review of the board evaluation, the board job description, board succession policy, if you are at a point with your organization in terms of sustainability, what does that look like if you are leading the organization, or if you have someone that's been with the organization for a while? What's the plan and how has the board prepared for that? The executive succession policy, board review of compensation structure, the compensation policy, a sustainability plan, a crisis management plan. I think this is really a priority right now, coming off of this pandemic that we're technically not out of, but we're definitely not where we were 2 years ago. So many organizations didn't have a crisis management plan. And because they didn't know how to operate. They didn't know how to operate if you can't go into an office. Are you allowing another thing that I think is really important for boards and administrations to really focus on is, do you have a cybersecurity policy? Do people utilize their own computers, their own cell phones to download sensitive and access sensitive information? If you're working where someone might be a case manager, have access to confidential information, and you give them access to use an app for their personal phone, how do you guarantee that other people won't have access to that? Do you provide a separate device for your team members? Do you say that if you're going to download the app can only be on the government, or I'm sorry, not government, your nonprofit issued device? So what do those controls look like? Are you giving people laptops? Do you have docking stations that when you're in the office? So are you giving people computers that only they can use? Or are you requiring, and there are a lot of smaller nonprofits that do this, they try to get around buying technology because it is an expense, but they end up allowing people to download files on their personal computers that are shared by whomever. They may be in a public space when they're using it. It might be their children. You never know, but you have when we talk about that general liability, protecting information and sensitivity, what types of things are you putting in place, and what types of things, what are the expectations of the board and protecting the organization from any legal liabilities? You definitely want code of ethics, conflict of interest statements, communication and social media plans nowadays. Who and how do we get to speak on behalf of the organization? Gift acceptance policy. I've been talking about this a lot, especially because of Venmo and Cash App being used in nonprofits. I don't necessarily agree with that, but because of that, you don't necessarily know who's donating to the organization. Do you have a policy that dictates your donor acceptance? What does that look like? When do you accept? Especially, we're not just talking about cash. We could be talking about stocks. Right now, we can be talking about cryptocurrency. And so not just policies around that, but policies around how are you accepting that, and should you accept that? I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but I think it was a university in the Northeast, and they accepted stock, and that stock was invested in, they didn't pay attention, but the stock was invested in the private jail community. And the students found out about that and forced the institution to sell that stock, because basically they were funding things that were really great around the university community. Could have been scholarships, could have been operations, could have been specific programming, but they were getting that money based on incarceration. And they were getting that money based on incarceration. When you're looking at private versus public jails, you're looking at private jails don't make money if people aren't in there. Public jails, they're typically trying to see people get out because of the budget costs associated with that. So when the students got wind of that, they forced the institution to sell. And so, but had there been, and there may have been one, and they may not have passed it, I don't know that to be true, but what are the donor relationships and the donor and the gift acceptance policy for the organization? And how often are you reviewing that? Do you have recommendations on donation acceptance platforms for startup nonprofits? Absolutely. So I think there are so many great ones. We've just had a conversation about that over the past few weeks. There's always PayPal for nonprofits, specifically, not PayPal, but PayPal for nonprofits. There's Mighty Cause, there's DonorBox. Someone just mentioned one the other night in one of the trainings I did online. I think it was called Snowball. I think there are a number of them, and I can make sure that I provide that in a follow-up, maybe the top 5 or just 5 that I know of in terms of recommendations for donor acceptance platforms. GiveLafly was also recommended in the chat. For those of you that have a donor platform that you like, can you just drop that in the chat? That way we can kind of crowdsource and share information. And then in addition to that, I'll do a follow-up that'll go out to everyone who registered for this as well. GiveButter, DonorBox, I definitely, FlipCause is listed as well. And like I said, PayPal for nonprofits. There's so many that are out there. What I would recommend is that if you're looking at an electronic if you're looking at an electronic platform for donor acceptance, you want to make sure that there is an option for an automatic letter, a donor acknowledgement letter to go out, because it will lift your load, especially if you're a smaller organization. Now, some organizations do just use a regular, they do just use regular, a regular like card service. So if they're accepting it, they just have the integration to use any type of merchant system. And that's too, it's fine. It just requires a little bit more work. If you don't have the team to be able to really navigate that, you want to look for something that's going to help to automate a little differently. And these are the things that, for the board perspective, you want to make sure in that document that you're not only outlining what should happen, but that you also document the policy and the process that aligns with that. And that's going to be under your internal controls. And then every.org, we have in the chat, every.org helps accept stock and crypto as an intermediary 501c3 to reduce the risk for your organization. And that, thank you for sharing that, Tina. It's every.org/nonprofits, and the direct link is in the chat. I'm saying this out loud for those that are going to be watching this on replay. But again, every.org helps accept stock and crypto as an intermediary 501c3 to reduce risk for your organization. And that is every.org/nonprofits. Right? So we want to make sure. So some of the other things that from a policy perspective, so here are the things that you want to have policies on and a process as it relates to your organization. What do your board meetings look like? What are the minutes captures need to look like? Again, when we do week 3, I'm going to give you a template for that, but meeting process for planning, meeting process for facilitation, meeting process for closeout. 3 very different parts of the meeting, but you should know what should happen in that process. What does it look for participation in committees, how you select committee members, how that information is captured by way of notes. When do those minutes and notes have to be provided? And then what's the distribution, review and distribution aspect associated with that? There should be, when you're thinking about your policies, you should also be looking at when it comes to capturing any votes that happen. I mentioned this a little earlier, but when it comes to any votes that should be happening during your board meetings, how are you capturing that information? How are you capturing the actual people that said yes, the actual people that said no, people that abstained, meaning they didn't say yes or no, and those who are just absent from that. And I used earlier, I provided a best practice from what we have done in the past, and it's because of my background in government. When there are, specifically for us, bylaw changes, we would have a draft of what the change is that would go out to people ahead of time. Any changes that would occur during the meeting would get marked up. Once we got to the point where we actually were all in agreement of the changes, then those changes, the amended version was what was voted on the very next meeting. So we captured who said yes, who said no, who was absent and who abstained. And the very next meeting, that new bylaw, so we would have old bylaw, new bylaw effective whatever date, and then under it, it would have everybody's signature, a signature line for everybody that was on the board, and those that said yes, then they would sign off on it. But we would already have the documentation in our minutes, but we wanted something a little bit different that was official. That's a little bit more challenging for those of you that have virtual board meetings or electronic convenings, but there are different ways that you can do that. We just wanted to make sure that if none of us were around anymore, the record would always reflect the decisions of the board at that time, and that those decisions would be able to be communicated without us being around. That is really, really important. You want to make sure that there are policies that talk about, so I provided some examples of what should happen, what should be on your list of policies that the board should review, and then identify the frequency of that review. But it should also outline the responsibility, like is there a committee that it needs to go to? So what's the process for reviewing each and every policy that the board is responsible for reviewing during whatever frequency cycle that it is. Policies, what happens? So from the The bylaws might say if someone misses a particular, if they miss 3 meetings in a year, that they should be removed from the board. But what is the process that goes along with that policy within the bylaws? So you might have something that says what should happen. You need something else to say, how should it happen? Because it removes individual interpretation of what should happen. Building up and bolstering up your nonprofit board side, the governance side, is not an overnight process. And a lot of times what we would do is have working committees that will work on specific aspects of the bylaws and the policies that needed to accompany that. And then those would be sent to everybody else for feedback. So the committee would do their work, or the working group that focused on something else. And a lot of times, quite honestly, you don't have to start from the ground up. Google, there are so many platforms for nonprofits that are in the marketplace now, where there are templates that you can at least start with. And then I would also add, when you come down to creating something, if you have an attorney on your board or access to legal representation, run this stuff by them first before you put it into practice, because you want to make sure not only are you making modifications or adding new bylaws or policies, but are these things in compliance with what you can and can't do on the state and federal level, number one. And number two, is it conflicting with anything else that's already in? It's like, when we're looking at regular laws that govern our communities, we may have a law that a new city council puts in place, but it actually might be in conflict with something that was passed in the 1900s. But we don't know that because we've not been in a cycle to review, and we're not really categorizing things in a way that lets us know if we're going to talk about this particular issue, there are a few other things that also come into the pipeline. And we need to make sure that putting one thing in doesn't add confusion or conflict to something else. So I will always say, to the extent that you can, if you don't have a legal representation, you can't afford legal representation, I would definitely look at some of the legal institutions. So any of the universities that may be in your area that may have in some sort of pro bono clinic for training for their law students. There may be some free resources available from any of the bar associations. So when you can't afford something, don't use that as I just don't have it. Look to see if there are any other avenues. Jump in some of these Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups for nonprofits, and ask for recommendations for any pro bono services that may be around to help you with legal advice or something like that. But when it's major and a liability, you want to make sure that you prioritize a budget for legal representation and legal advice to review documents so that you can always be in order. You want to make sure that there are fundraising documents regarding fundraising expectations. So is it give and get for the board members? And if it's give, how much is that? And if it is it get individually? Is it get collectively? I'll give you an example. For me, it was $5,000 per board member. You had to pay it all at once when the new fiscal year started, or when you first joined the board. You could divide it into 4 equal payments. You can divide it into monthly payments, but a payment was due. So if you did quarterly, that payment was due when you joined the board. And then once a quarter at the beginning of the quarter, then the next payment was due. So it had to be equal to a quarterly payment or above. It could not be below unless there was a separate conversation that happened, because life happens. But we just need to know that the board authorized, for the organization that I ran, the board authorized us to send invoices to the board members. So it wasn't at that time, we really weren't doing a lot, because this was a while ago, we really weren't doing recurring donations online for our board members because of the size of the donations that they were making. And so some of them paid 1 month, they may have done like half of their donation from their businesses. Another month, they may have done it from their personal, and they split it that way. That part's up to them. That's not up to us. But what we did do is we sent invoices to them and we provided the date. And then when we didn't get it by that date, then we provided that report to the board chair and to the treasurer for them to move forward on how they followed up with each individual board member. So there was a date. We didn't do the collection after that. We left that up to the board because that was a board responsibility. Do you have a recommendation on the number of people that should be on your board? Depends on, I would always say number one, odd number, just always an odd number is going to be number one. So I think smaller boards are better, especially if you're new or smaller. I don't know the size of all organizations. Some of you, I know who you are. I would say at least 5, somewhere between 5 to 9. If you are new, I would say 5 to 7. I wouldn't even do 9. The higher the number, the more voices in the room. And when you are just trying to figure out what's the right process for the organization, it would be great to have more board members, but sometimes you might not be ready for that. I recommend that when organizations are starting out, I say 5 to 7, and then figure out what growth looks like after that. So if you know you do 5 to start, and then we'll do 5 to start, we want to get to 7 within 6 to 9 months or 6 to 12 months. And then from that 12-month mark, then within the next year, we want to scale to 9. What that does is it allows you to have rolling dates. So you won't have everybody coming onto the board at one time and everybody leaving the board at one time. You will have some level of institutional knowledge, especially if you don't have options for people to renew their board term, or people just don't want to renew their board terms. You still want to make sure that you have people that have some level of institutional knowledge on what has been happening on the board, because it is really helpful. A board that I just stepped down from, I mean, we had 3-year cycles, and the knowledge of those that had served as board chair in the past, the knowledge of those that had just been on boards for 3 years, the things that they could recollect so quickly and help to point the rest of us who were relatively new when we first started, point us in the direction of where in old minutes something could be. They could tell us what year something happened. They could tell us the history of the organization a lot differently. And so you want to make sure you have that. So to start off, I would say 5 to 7. 5 is a solid number. 3 is not enough. 3 is your minimum requirement most of the time to found on a state level. 3 is not enough because most times, unfortunately, people put their mother, cousin, sister, friends, right, and not true people. You want to make sure you're identifying. We're going to get to that in a few minutes because I want to make sure that we get to how do you create a matrix, and I'm going to pull up an example of a matrix and put that on the screen for you. But 5 to 7, and then develop a plan to scale. But you don't want to be in the teens and going to 20 when you're a small organization. Really, those kind of numbers are built for large organizations that are bringing in millions upon millions a year, and they need that social capital, and they're at a different point. So when you start looking at the higher numbers, you really need to look at is your house in order? Do you have the bylaws? Do you have the policies to associate with that? Because that really means you're trying to attract a different type of board, a board member. How did you determine $5,000 board contribution amount? Because anything less than that was not enough for me. I'm being honest about that. We looked at the number of board members. We looked at the overall budget for the organization. What percentage of the budget, the revenue, what percentage of the budget that we want the board impact to make? So that's their personal contribution on the give and their collective efforts on the get, and then any leadership and support that they provided on any other fundraising activities. And so once we looked at that, we came up with estimates of 5,000, but then we also started talking about who could give 5,000. And we started talking about the social capital that we wanted to come with that. Now, I will add this as a caveat. When you're looking at, especially when you're using like grassroots-based organizations, I also think it's important. So we start talking about the matrix. I also think it's important that we pay attention to community And do we have representation of the people we're serving through the mission on our boards? And if we don't have those people on our boards, then is that $5,000 contribution a roadblock? And if so, then I would recommend that you think a little bit creatively. So, because you don't want to say, sometimes when you think about it, saying a 5,000 could also limit. I might have a board member that can give me 15,000 a year, but they're going to give me 5 because that's what I asked for, right? And so in those situations where you want to make sure that the door is open from a matrix perspective, for community members, community engaged people, people that represent the stakeholders of the community, plus the social capital that may come from corporate and government and things like that, you may want to look at, here is the minimum we're asking for, a contribution of at least. And so that contribution might be $2,500. Some people, I've seen some board members say, you give based on your own ability to give, right? So we don't know what you bring in a year. And so therefore, this is a trust system. What we're asking is that you give something tangible to your giving level. So for somebody, that might be $1,000, right? Somebody else, it might be 10, 15, or 25,000. And so there are organizations that I've seen that have left that up to the individual giver. Some have put a minimum requirement on it, and some have put a hard requirement, right? But I think it also goes to what does your budget, overall budget, look like? And what are you looking for the board to contribute? When we launched Cause Studio, we looked at the Robin Hood Foundation in New York as our model. And at that time, and I don't know if it's still this way for their board, but at that time, their board was, remember, for all operational costs. And then the organization, the administrative team, was responsible for raising everything programmatically. The Robin Hood Foundation, their board, they're in very different tax brackets, right? But I loved that model of saying, because when you think about when you're applying for grants or you're asking for funds, people, I mean, during the pandemic times, we've seen people kind of loosen up a little bit, but a lot of times people don't want to give and donate to organizations for operational costs. That's a whole nother conversation. But to have the board responsible for that, and then to have the administration responsible for everything else. So then when you look at, well, what's the operational cost of the organization based on the budget? How does the board come up with that? What are they responsible for when it comes to collective giving? And what are they responsible for when it comes to individual giving? And so you provide some flexibility in that. But April, I will say that I would first start off with, what is the budget? What percentage of the budget do you want the board responsible for? Is that realistic for the size of the budget and the connections, size of the budget, the size of the board, and the social capital of the board, the relationships that they have? I think there are some other factors that go into that, but for us, $5,000 was the minimum. It's $1,250 every quarter. And so we knew that from a board leadership perspective, that was a safe amount for us. And we wanted to make sure that we had the operational costs to keep Cause Studio going. Kind of was the same thing with the organization that I ran in the DC area. Our board was very committed to giving funding, and we would get checks beyond. So that minimum standard, we'd get the minimum, and then we'd also get more. We'd get more from them, from their personal companies, their churches. So there was their give was strong, but their get was stronger. And so I think it just depends on the board and what they feel they can be responsible for, what they want to be committed to. But I also think it needs to be tangible and realistic and show that the board is really focused on supporting the organization. When I say get, does that mean the board is responsible for getting funding? Yes. Or that they get people to get. So it depends. So give is that they are personally giving from their own personal funds. Give can also come from their businesses, depending upon how they give philanthropically. Get can be that they go out and collectively. So let's just hypothetically say your board is responsible for getting $150,000. right? The go out and get, and they're responsible for donating 100. So the 100 is taken care of. The board collectively will make the decision. Do we want to go after this 150 together? Or do we want to divvy this up and say that everybody is responsible for getting $10,000, right? And so the board has a responsibility to figure out what that looks like for them. So yes, it could mean that they're going out and they're impacting major donations from companies, some corporations, from churches, from governments, whatever their social capital allows them to do. It could be that they're going out and they're impacting individual donations. I always talk, about I won't talk about it today, but just this collective ambassador type of concept that can really help nonprofits raise money if they tap into the social capital of the people that are key volunteers and board members within their organizations. And so there are a myriad of ways, but the board has to decide what that level of giving and what that process looks like for themselves, in addition to or including any fundraisers that the organization hosts throughout the year. One thing I want to talk about before we go into this matrix portion is, what should you be doing when you bring on new board members? Especially board members, you're welcome, especially board members who have not had any experience before, but that they would be a great asset and contribution, right? So we don't always want to discount people who don't have experience, but we also want to make sure that we're paying attention to people that have experience or are willing to understand and dig deep into their responsibilities. And so there should be an ongoing efforts to invest in the professional development training of your board members, whatever that looks like. There should be a structured orientation for your board members before they actually start. And then there should be what kind of training. One of the things that we did on one of the boards that I served is that the first 30 minutes of every meeting, we invested in some level of training that wasn't linked necessarily to our professional development training as a board member, but our professional development training that reminded us of mission first and mission forward. And so it could be, having someone from an organization that we funded a year ago, 5 years ago, come and kind of give us an update for 30 minutes and tell us what they've been doing, how our funding helped them, what kind of support do they need, what kind of changes have happened in their organization, maybe what's happening in the sector as it relates to what's around their mission. We also had people come in and give us updates on board specific training. So not just professional development training for nonprofits and things, but what particular area do we need assistance with as it relates to our effectiveness as a board in terms of operating? And so once a year, especially when new board members came on board, because we were using a different governance model, that we would have a trainer come in and reorient existing members and then just orient new members on the way that we operated on a day-to-day basis as it relates to new boards. You want to make sure that what you're doing of these few things here, you want to make sure that you're increasing board member knowledge, right? So anytime you have a board member should also have a manual. So anytime you're giving board members information, what you're giving them should increase their knowledge. It should promote interaction between board members at the meetings. It should clearly state what their obligations are to the organization. It should provide for ongoing development for the board as a whole. It should really help to establish smoother meetings. A lot of times meetings feel stale. They don't feel like people are engaging with one another. So how do you enable more engaging and smoother and process meetings? And what ways can you create an environment in this information that you're giving to board members? The goal is effective decision-making, right? We're coming in to understand our responsibilities, but we're also coming in to make some effective decisions for the organization. What are the better and best practices that have worked for your organization? In terms of sending questions ahead of time, asking questions ahead of time, asking questions during the meeting, limiting the question and answer period. One of the boards that I sat on, we limited our question and answer period to 3 minutes per person. And when we gave that, we didn't have that requirement, people just talking long periods of time. But when we limited to 3 minutes per person, we got very strategic in the questions that we were asking, and we didn't repeat questions that were already asked by someone else. The only time, the types of things that we said is, I want to concur with, I'm a +1 what someone else said, but my question is. So we are edifying what someone else said, but we're really going to go straight to the questions that matter most to us in that time. When it comes to what types of information do you give to board members, on the topics, you want to make sure that you're giving them a packet on your mission, vision, and values, and the long-term strategic plan of the organization. You want to give them the organizational chart and staffing plan, existing and future plans for the organization if it's available. You want to give them a case statement of the programs and the services that are provided by the organization, any of the physical facilities of the organization. So any real estate, where is it? What is it used for? Any summaries? You want to give them the roles and responsibilities of the board as a whole, but then your individual officer positions as well. How the organization is regulated. So that means giving them the bylaws and any associated policies. You can give that to them in a bind, all these things in a binder, but you can also give them access to an electronic portal, and that could also be helpful. It just depends on your audience. I'm a big fan of reducing paper now, but you can give it to them electronically, and giving it to them electronically also means it's an easier way to redistribute information or update information without having to make sure it's mailed out. Just depends on your organization. Code of conduct, code of ethics, any external standards, licensing, and accreditation that's needed by the organization to facilitate the type of work that you do. You want to make sure that your board members are clear on what type of general liability and insurance the organization carries. You want to make sure that they get a copy of the budget, your full budget, full operating budget, but then if you have programmatic budgets, you want to give that to them as well. You want to make sure that you give the board how you carry out the role as supervising the CEO or executive director, the leader of the administrative side. A condensed version of the legal responsibilities of the board. And finally, in addition to the board, the organizational operational budget and the programmatic budget, any other financial documents that they need to have a full perspective of what's happening in the organization. And if this applies, any type of liabilities that the organization, so if the organization is being sued, there's a potential that the organization is going to be sued, potential that you're going to sue somebody else, something that some other sort of liabilities, whether it's against you or you're going against someone else. Quite honestly, board members need to know that you have liabilities before they say yes. You don't have to share that information, but they need to know that there are some legal liabilities. Check with your legal teams on how much you should share. But when someone says yes to your organization, they join the team, they should not walk into a legal situation that they needed to know about ahead of time, because it could have made a difference on whether or not they join the organization, and that decision should be up to them. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Any questions? Because I want to get to this board matrix. So any questions before we move on? I want to get to that. So we have about 21 minutes to do the board matrix and questions and answers. These 2 hours went fast. Here I thought I was giving a lot of time. I don't think I gave enough. But we have 2 more weeks, and I can't wait until next week, because if you all are coming back, you're going to really, really enjoy board build. So give me 1 minute to switch my screen, and so I can bring up this matrix. In 1 second, I closed it accidentally. Okay, perfect. All right. All right. Can everybody see, if somebody can just let me know that you actually see the broad recruitment worksheet? This is coming from Board Source. I'll also include this in the recap email as well. But I want to provide this so you can do something like this, as simple as doing this in an Excel spreadsheet, a Google sheet, whatever works for your organization. One of the things that I always say when you're thinking about developing a matrix for a board is you want to think about not just the demographic information, right? That's shown here, the age, the gender, the race and ethnicity. I want to think about the competencies and the skill sets that are needed. And so what I recommend first that boards do is that board members sit down and think about what has been missing. What types of skill sets, knowledge base, when it comes to DEI, what's been missing? Are you missing the representation from the community? So every board member have that discussion. You have this collective discussion over that. And then you talk about how many positions do you actually have? Do you have 2 positions? Do you have 1 position? Do you have 5 positions? Are you replacing someone? The person that you're replacing, is there a skill set that will be missing? So you might not be missing something right now, but when that person that's leaving the board, when they leave, will you be missing a particular skill set? So when you're assessing what's missing, you want to assess what's missing potentially in the immediate future as well. And what I recommend that people do is that you give everybody their own individual sheet, Google Sheet, Excel document, set up like this. Now you can change these categories on the left based on what's important for your organization. I will say there are organizations that don't like to ask age. They don't like to ask gender identity. This was a very old version. For gender, I would prefer to see male, female, non-binary, prefer not to say, right? Give those options because we don't want to force people into a box that doesn't match who they are. Okay. And so you want to make sure that, and even though you're not giving this to the people that you're interested in, you want to be sensitive to that as you're going through this process. And so you want to make sure that these categories match your organization. What types, and I love this section that talks about community connections, because we forget to ask about the social capital. You've heard me talk about social capital, that's your relationships. And so what types of relationships do these potential board members that you're going to be looking at, what's important to you for connections in the community? And what kind of resources do they have? Or do they have access to? Now, a lot of this is going to be based on perception, right? Because we know people to an extent. And so sometimes when we go into these matrix exercises, we go into it with a perspective of what we think people have access to, and we really won't know what that looks like until that person is interviewed for the actual board position, if you so choose to give it to them or offer them an opportunity. So you want to create this board matrix worksheet. And then what I then provide, the advice that I provide to people is I say, then go and do these exercises alone. You want every board member that's on the nominating committee, or maybe this is an exercise that everybody on the board does, and then the results of it is given to the nominating committee or the leadership committee, whoever is responsible for vetting and interviewing potential new board members. And I always say, who are the people that you know, and who are the people you want to know? And then sometimes you even want to look at who are the people that I don't know, I don't know them, or I know them, or I want to find people like. So do you want an Oprah? So you want Oprah-like people. And so what you would do is charge everybody with doing 5, 10, 20, whatever that dump looks like for your organization, or you say at least 5, no more than 10. And then you have everybody where you see this 1 through 9 at the top, they'll write the person's name. And I would also recommend when you do this, so I do mine a little differently. I have names on the left and this information going across the top, because I also want a column for any LinkedIn profiles, any websites that we can go to. So as much information that we can put in boxes about that person that's being recommended. And then you'll have that person that's submitting this, that's doing this, check off as much as they can. I typically recommend that people begin ranking them, right? So here are my 5 people, and of the qualities of passionate about the mission, I ask people to rank 1 to 5, not just a check. Because when we bring all of this together, the idea is to get all the number ones in the different categories that are important to the organization. And I want to be able to zero in on the number ones and ask people, why is that person your number one? So we can look, because what we do after we turn this in is we consolidate and put everybody. So if we got 40 recommendations from the entire board, then we then consolidate and put everything in one group. And then we categorize, and we typically categorize based on expertise first. And then we look at any of their community connections. So those are our 1 and 2s first. And then we look at the demographic information, race, ethnicity, gender identity, and age, so that we can make sure that we are doing our best to be more inclusive in our thinking, but that's not our first primary. But it could be the primary depending upon the organization. So it just depends on your organization and how you prioritize things. And who the organization represents. I think that's also going to be key. I know I've seen organizations in the Dallas area where they have specified at least 51% of the sitting board has to represent the race and ethnicity of the groups of the people that they serve through their programs and services. So that could be somebody from a historically discriminated group, race, gender identity, ethnicity, could be a number of different things. So your board has to have some laws and some bylaws around that, around their leadership. So once you do this, then you all decide, your leadership team will then look at this list. You all have conversations about it in terms of your leadership team or your nominating committee, what you decide to call it. And then you'll rank, right? You'll rank replacing the old people, and you'll also rank replacing the new people, making sure you're not losing any skill sets that are important to the organization, making sure you identify new skill sets that are needed for the organization, those community connections and inclusivity. How are you making sure that your board is inclusive? Because that can be a detriment to your organizations as well. You'll also see on grant applications. Now, these first 3 things are typically asked now when people are asking, provide me a list of your board and their connections. They also want to know age range, gender identity, and race and or ethnicity. So you want to make sure you are capturing that information. But when you onboard people, you also need to make sure that from the way that you all filled this out, you also need to do the respectful piece of it too, and ask people how they identify. As well, and not do it from our physical perspective of what we're seeing. Make sure you're asking people how they identify so you can capture that information internally, right? And we do this, so we identify who are our top number ones when we start our deliberation. We make our list. So if we're looking for someone that has philanthropic background, we'll make our top list. Who are our number ones that we saw across the board? And then we rank those to begin interviewing people and then make the offer. We don't interview everybody at the same time. We interview based on who is our number one. If number one is not a great choice, we then go to number 2. And then we do that for every category where we have a need that needs to be replaced. And we do that until we get to the point where we filled our positions on the board. What we don't do is fill because we need a body. We fill because it is the right fit for the organization. And a lot of times we're seeing that organizations are filling because they need a body, but it's not a right fit. And if you've ever been on a board or worked for an organization that had a board where it just seemed like there was always conflict, it's typically because they didn't pick right in the very beginning. And that's unfortunate. And people don't like to get off boards because you don't like them. They're going to stay there on the board, which means if you have a 2 or 3 year term, you're going to have some challenges along the way if you all can't find a way to work through it. Sometimes those challenges are people that are pushing the envelope to get you to operate more effectively. So it's not necessarily you want those types of people to go, but when you have people that really haven't bought into the vision, they've bought into your reputation, they've bought into wanting to be associated with the organization, that's when you really have to be careful. And so going through a matrix where you're looking at different perspectives of people and people are doing it separately so that you can bring all of that information in together, you kind of widen the opportunities. So you're casting that net really wide so that you can really narrow down the playing field and identify preferably and hopefully the best people for your organization. So I'm going to stop there. Are there any questions? Because I know that we talked about a lot and there's a lot more to come. So I'm going to get ready to open it up for questions. I just want to say, so from a replay perspective, this is where I'm going to close because I want to be sensitive to those that are here live with me today. And I don't want to have, again, if you're asking me any personal information, I don't want that just sitting out on the internet. So for those of you that are watching this via a replay, what I do ask is that you just, wherever you're watching it, that you just hit in the comments replay. That way, if I am checking different sources, it will definitely be on the Urban Search Institute's Facebook page. If I see questions that you may have, it'll flag me when I see replayed that I know that new people have watched it. And then I can kind of peruse through the comments to see if there are any questions that I can answer for you. And then for everyone else that's here, just know that I never take these opportunities for granted. It is an honor to always be able to serve. I hope there is something that you took out of the training for today. And my hope is that you also return to the training next week. We will have week 2. We will be talking about how do we match well with potential board members. The session is going to be primarily led by Board Build, boardbuild.org. They have a number of opportunities, amazing opportunities for organizations in North Texas, to training your existing board members, to training people who are interested in being board members, and also posting at no cost for many organizations right now, any opportunities that you have and to fill positions on your board, that you can actually post them on their website for free, and then they will start help assisting with the matching based on the people that have gone through their training program. So people who actually have been trained to understand board governance and responsibilities. So with that being said, I thank you. I'm going to stop now. I'm going to stop the recording so that we can go into Q&A for the rest of you. So